air was still heavy with the bitter scent of smoke. Ash drifted slowly, carried by the faint wind that moved across the mountains. Every step crunched underfoot, the sound of rubble and ruin filling the silence. What had once been a place, a peace and prayer, the Marian center of the Holy Spirit, was now nothing but broken beams, blackened stones, and shattered glass. For years it had stood as a refuge for the weary, a sanctuary for those who needed quiet to whisper their prayers. And now it looked like a skeleton of its former self. The walls were scorched, the roof had collapsed, and the sacred altar where countless candles once flickered in soft light had been devoured by the flames. But in the middle of it all, one thing stood untouched, the statue of the Virgin Mary. There she was, calm, still, white as snow, as though the fire had not dared to touch her. Her robe was spotless, unmarked by soot or ash. Her folded hands rested gently in prayer, her eyes lowered with the same soft grace they had always held. Around her feet, the ground itself seemed protected. While every surface nearby bore the scars of fire, the small circle where she stood was clean. The flames had stopped at an invisible line, as if they had bowed before her presence and gone no further. It was the morning of September 24th, 2024, high in the mountains of Cordoba, Spain. For days, the land had been burning. Wildfires had raged across hills and valleys, pushed forward by sharp winds. They had consumed pine forests, fields, and farms. They had leapt across dry roads and forced whole villages to flee. The Marian center of the Holy Spirit had been directly in their path. People feared the worst. They knew the building could not survive. And yet, within those ruins, one figure remained unshaken. The night before had been terrible. The sky glowed orange as flames raced up the mountainside. The air carried embers that fell like sparks from a blacksmith's forge, drifting until they found new places to ignite. Firefighters had worked tirelessly, aiming powerful jets of water at the flames. But the winds were cruel. The blaze moved faster than they could fight it. The roof of the Marian center began to glow from the heat. Beams cracked and fell, and glass windows shattered with sharp pops before scattering across the stone floor. Candles melted instantly, and the altar cloths became nothing but black streaks of ash. Smoke filled every corner until no one could see, no one could breathe. No one believed the statue could survive. By dawn, when the fire had finally passed on to devour the next ridge, firefighters returned to the ruins. Their boots sank into the ash as they moved carefully, stamping out embers that still glowed faintly. They had prepared themselves for silence, for emptiness. But then, through the haze, they saw her. The statue stood as it always had, white, whole, untouched. One firefighter froze, staring at the figure, unable to believe her own eyes. She raised her phone and captured a photo. That single image spread across phones, across chats, across social media within hours. The sight was too powerful to keep hidden. Some called it a miracle, some called it chance, but for the men and women standing there in that quiet morning light, there was no room for doubt. It was more than stone. It was a sign. The Marian Center had never been a grand or famous place. Its walls were plain, its benches simple but polished only by the touch of time and the prayers of those who sat upon them. And yet, people had loved it because it was a refuge. It was far from noise and distraction. High in the mountains, where the ringing of church bells carried farther than human voices, pilgrims would climb the winding paths to reach it, bringing flowers, candles, and their burdens. They would kneel before the statue, whispering prayers through tears, or raising words of joy after weddings and blessings. The Virgin Mary stood there through it all, silent but steady, her presence offering comfort. But now, after the fire, her survival meant something even greater. In a sea of destruction, she stood untouched, and in that, many saw hope. This was not the first time such a thing had happened. 9 years earlier, on July 30th, 2015, another fire had broken out hundreds of kilometers away, not in the mountains of Cordoba, but at a quiet military base outside Madrid. That summer had been brutally hot. The land was dry, the grass like brittle, straw waiting for a spark, and one spark was all it took. No one remembers exactly how it started, perhaps a piece of overheated equipment, perhaps an ember carried by the wind. But once the flames took hold, they spread across the base with terrifying speed. Soldiers rushed to move equipment, secure weapons, and fight the fire. The air filled with smoke, thick and choking, even for men trained to keep calm under pressure. The scene was overwhelming. By evening, large parts of the base lay in ruin. Grass had been burned to ash, crates of supplies reduced to nothing, and even metal was scorched and bent by the heat. When the flames finally died down, soldiers walked the grounds, checking for dangerous hot spots. And then, in the middle of a blackened field, they stopped. There, untouched by fire, stood a statue of Our Lady of Lords. She was still white, her robes flowing, her hands folded in prayer. Not a single mark of soot or scorch marred her. Round her feet, impossibly, the grass was green, fresh. Even flowers stood in vases beside her, their petals soft and unburned, as if the fire had ignored them completely. It made no sense. Fire does not skip what is fragile. It devours everything: wood, cloth, flowers, and even steel. And yet, here was this circle of life, untouched in the middle of destruction. One soldier knelt down, running his hand over the grass. It was cool, damp, alive. Another soldier traced the boundary with his boots, walking in a perfect circle where green ended and ash began. They were stunned into silence. No one spoke the word miracle at first, but it hung in the air all the same. Later, as evening came, one soldier took out his phone and snapped pictures. Just like in Cordoba years later, those photos spread quickly, at first among families and friends, then across Catholic groups, and eventually into the news. People asked questions, skeptics offered explanations, and yet, for those who had stood there in that moment, there was no explanation that could undo what they saw. A statue standing in the middle of devastation, calm and unchanged, surrounded by life when everything else had been burned. The military confirmed the facts. Yes, the statue had been there before the fire. Yes, it had survived untouched. Yes, the flowers and grass remained alive while everything around them had been destroyed. They offered no explanations, no theological conclusions, but too many. The image spoke for itself. In Cordoba in 2024 and in Madrid in 2015, the statues stood against flames. Different places, different years, different people, but the same image repeated. Fire had destroyed everything, yet Mary stood untouched, her hands folded in prayer for believers. It was no coincidence. It was a sign. Mary, who in Catholic tradition is called comfort of the afflicted and refuge of sinners, had not abandoned her children. In the ashes of Cordoba and in the charred fields of Madrid, she remained, a mother watching over her people, and even for those who did not believe. The sight was unforgettable, because deep in every heart there is a longing, a desire for something that can endure when everything else falls apart. When the Marian center burned, villagers climbed the hill the next morning. They brought flowers and laid them at Mary's feet. Some knelt, others simply stood, silent, staring at the white figure against the black ruins. They felt something stir within them, perhaps gratitude, perhaps awe, perhaps a wordless sense that what they were seeing meant more than anyone could explain. These stories spread so quickly not just because they were strange, but because they touched something universal. In the middle of destruction, there's hope. In the middle of chaos, there's peace for some. It is faith for others. It is family, love, or a promise that will not break. But for many, in those moments, it was Mary, a mother, standing quietly, reminding her children that they are not alone. Even when flames rise high, even when the world turns to ash, the image lingers, a white statue, hands folded in prayer, calm and unshaken, standing when all else has fallen. And perhaps, in that, there is a message for us all. The morning light in Cordoba was pale, filtered through smoke that still clung to the hills. Villagers who had spent the night watching the mountains burn began to climb the winding paths toward the Marian center. Some came with heavy steps, fearing what they would find. Others came with small bouquets of flowers, wanting to lay them at the ruins even if nothing remained. Mothers held their children's hands tightly as they walked, whispering words of comfort though their own hearts were heavy. They had all expected to see only destruction. When they reached the top and saw the sight for themselves, many stopped in their tracks. The white statue of the Virgin stood there, calm and still, rising from the ashes like a silent witness of hope. Round her, the ruin of the sanctuary stretched in every direction. The benches were gone. The windows had melted. The roof was nothing but twisted beams. But Mary remained,